Okay. I'm back. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna actually move these. Alright. Yes, I'm back. So sorry about that. I have no clue what that was about. I do know that the weather up here has been really weird, like rainy, thunderstorms, all kinds of things. So that could have affected it. But yeah, OBS locked up. I noticed it because it was trying to reconnect to chat. So I'm wondering if it was just a whole bunch of connected things or just the fact that the weather was being really weird. So yeah. I'm back, I think. Oh man, so sorry about that. It's only the second time that's happened to me, I think. Like midstream. Kind of weird. Yeah, because I was like half an hour into stream and just. Oh, that's interesting. The incoming ad break notification is now different. Fascinating. I don't know what that was about. It used to be down at the bottom of chat, now it's at the top. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Turning on the closed captioning. Yeah. It's apparently a day for technology. Or not. Alright. You're a little bit on the delay there, Frosty Tools. Or Stream Elements. One of the two. Yeah. So, yeah. I'll end up with a 2-part stream again. Oh well. I'll just export the second half. But yes, for those of you who would like to watch my streams later or unable to make it when I am actually live, I do always export my VODs to YouTube before they get dumped off of Twitch. So if you are unable to make the stream, you can always watch them on Twitch before they expire, or you can head on over to my YouTube, which is here. It's also linked on my About panels. Alright, let's see. I also swapped out my headphones because the battery was dying. Alright. Oh my goodness, so sorry. It's been a long day. Oh, good grief. That is not what I wanted to do. Okay. I was trying to zoom my monitor in a little bit, but it didn't want to work. Alright, let's try this again. Chapter 13. Alright. Yeah, hopefully no more technical issues. If I crash again, I might just give up for the night. The weather's been a little bit wonky. But anyway, we're gonna give this a try and see how it works. Oh, you probably missed my epic stream crash. Um, it's okay. Um, yeah, I actually the stream entirely crashed, and I ended up having to reboot my computer. Like, I thought it was just OBS, but apparently there was a bunch of other things going on too, which makes me think that it was more my internet being crappy because of the weather when I live in the sticks. So that was my thought. So rebooted the PC. Everything seems to be okay. Seems being the operative word. Um, we'll see how it goes. But welcome back, cause I'm back too. Oh man. All right. Move the water there. All right. I'm actually gonna bring it up on the other browser. I think. Yeah, a little bit more control over it that way. I wanted to zoom in on the text of my story, and it was just making it entirely too big. So I'm gonna try it with the other browser. Chapter 13. Let's see. Ah, yes. That's better. Yeah, I was trying to do it on Opera GX, and it went from 100 to 200%, and I'm like, that doesn't really work for me. So, yeah, I went back to Chrome. Okay. Alright. So we're on chapter 13, and we'll see how far we get this evening, and if my internet holds out. Redemption, chapter 13. Why land the remainder of their forces on the planet when they're still fielding a sizable amount of ships? Stefan asked as he watched the tactical feed from New Hope on Blue Talon's forward HUD. Revenge? Brink asked from the Firebird. Get back at the Jedi for defeating them at Renvar and losing most of their fleet here? I mean, I thought combat with a lightsaber was more honorable for both sides. The Sith are without honor, Stefan said as he leaned back in the pilot's seat of Blue Talon. This is more than just a return to a traditional battle. What are you thinking, Stefan? Ari asked him. Bane wasn't your typical Sith, and this one has been cunning from the start, building their forces and training warriors. This is something on a scale I have never thought possible. Mick, what do you think? Two things, Mick replied as he threw the Firebird through a hairpin smuggler's reverse. As his aft drifted dangerously close to the nose of a Sith... Wow, words. As his aft drifted dangerously close to the nose of a Sith starfighter that he'd just been going head-to-head with, he kicked in the sublight at full power and vaporized the craft in his ion exhaust. 1. Less talking, more vaping. 2. Whoever's in charge on the other end isn't a Sith, which is irrelevant anyway, because no matter what he is or isn't, he just took out Red Squadron on his own. By the Force, Stefan breathed. Turlon, the kid's fine, Mick said, a little hotter than he'd wanted. He's on New Hope with Callista. Remind me, if we all live through this, I need to talk to those two. Brink, try to get me on the frequency their lead is using, Mick said as he rolled the Firebird up on her port side and sideslipped between two enemy dreadnoughts. One of them had been tracking him with turbolaser fire and, as a result, ended up ripping a line down the other dreadnought's port side. I want to ask him something. Working on it, Brink replied, tapping keys on the comm system. The whole comm system was abuzz with traffic, and Mick winced at the damage reports rolling in. He could hear the fear, anger, excitement, and despair evident in the pilots' voices. Gold 3! I can't shake him! I've got him! No, wait! White 2 is EV! Rampart just lost shields! Mayday! Mayday! Somebody help! Watch your 6, lead! She's gone. With every passing minute, more died. The weight of it all seemed settled squarely on Micron's shoulders and threatened to crush the rogue. Can't think like that, he told himself. There'll be more time to mourn after. I have to stay focused on the now, or more will join the list of dead. Moncal cruiser Corsica Gem just lost port shields. Mick checked his HUD and saw that he was close enough to the gem to help. A Lancer-class frigate was pounding her port side with laser fire. The Lancers were designed as anti-snub fighter ships, and the lasers weren't nearly as strong as those found on, say, a Star Destroyer, but enough would take down the gem. Brink, scratch the comm thing for a moment, Mick ordered as he flipped the Firebird through a loop and dove for the frigate. Get me targeting solutions for all the guns on that Lancer's starboard side. Feed the telemetry to everyone nearby. You got it, boss, Brink replied. A dozen boxes appeared on Mick's heads-up display, marking the gun emplacements on the side of the Lancer facing the gem. All fighters near Corsica Gem, Mick called. I'm feeding you targeting solutions. On my mark, launch 2 missiles. Mick's targeting box quickly went from yellow to red, and a steady tone sounded in the cockpit. Mark! From all over, purple-white streaks shot through space and slammed into the Lancer's starboard side. Guns are down, Brink reported. Corsica Gem. Get all of your port tractor beams on that Lancer now. Pull her close and use her as a shield. Affirmative, sir. Sometimes I forget that you fought in the Thrawn War, Brink said as he returned to work on the comm. Then you go and steal the man's genius. Ah, Mick grinned. I'd like to call it borrowing without permission. But he's dead anyway. What's he gonna do? Good point. The Sith fleet had taken a beating, and the Jedi had proved themselves worthy adversaries. Still, their numbers were dwindling fast, and as he broke to port before spitting an X-wing in his crosshairs and lancing its engine assembly with laser fire, he let a small grin play across his face. Out of the main fighting for the moment, he glanced at his scanners. Somehow he'd lost 2 capital ships in the rear of his fleet. But there were... No, then he saw them. There was the slightest blur in the backdrop of stars as the Dauntless exploded. Cloaking shields. Clever. Rearguard, watch for ion exhaust trails and keep your shields up, he ordered. There are 2 cloaked ships in your midst. Aye, my lord. His squadron is down to 2 fighters, him and his wingman. Blade 2, on my wing, he ordered. Keep your shields even. We have the Firebird. A double click on his comm signified Blade 2's acknowledgement of the order. He checked his scopes before diving in. Star Destroyers Harbinger, Deathlance, Revenge, and Misery. I want that damned suit taken down. Pin him and unleash hell. After getting confirmation from all 4 captains, he dove into the battle and began a weaving run for the Firebird. All the quadanium in the galaxy can't protect you from the combined fire of 4 Imperial Star Destroyers, Lieutenant Talon. Let's see how good you are without your precious suit, Card. I see you, Sniper. Welcome in. Number 13. Good to see you this evening. I've got that channel for you, Mick, Brink said as Mick threw his ship into a sidelong barrel roll, evading more fire from the swarm of fighters he found himself in. Good. Mick let a sly grin spread across his face. Put me through. As ordered. Brink flipped the appropriate switch. I see you on my scopes, Mick said as he rolled through a twisting loop that put him behind the Sith starfighter. With a burst from the ventral quads, the engines blew apart and sent the craft tumbling end over end. Having Ari on the quads almost felt like cheating, but the rogue let a frail grin spread across his face. Come to try your hand at a real challenge? Ah, the ever-present cockiness of a fighter jock. The other's mocking voice came back, distorted through the comm, yet somehow Mick swore it sounded vaguely familiar. Wouldn't you be better suited in an X-wing leading a squadron and not a ragtag fleet? I'd be better suited with you in my targeting box, Mick replied as he sideslipped onto his opponent's flight path. Make my day and keep your course. Mick's target box went green, and he loosed a burst from the forward guns, but the enemy rolled hard to port and escaped unscathed. Come now, he chided. Where's the sport in that? Where's the sport in any of this? Mick shot back as he went to a long loop that put him on the fighter's tail again. What is this to you? A game? You could call it that, was the reply. The lead juked his craft in every direction, and Mick was hard-pressed to stay on his tail. Life is one big dartboard, board, and we're all just pieces. In that sense, this is a game. A game you will not be winning. Mick caught the blip on his rear scanners in time to roll into a starboard sweeping arc and evade the green lasers lancing toward his aft. A half heartbeat later, an explosion marked the end of that tail as Ari continued to blast away. You'll find I don't always play by the rules, Mick said as he came out of his arc and flew straight between two friendly Star Destroyers. The big ships laid down covering fire, and the Sith were forced to break off Mick's tail. The rogue came around from behind them and dove onto a vector that would intercept the lead's flight path. The Sith pulled a beautiful smuggler's reverse, and Mick pulled hard on the control yoke. He put the bird through the tightest climb she could handle and was on the Sith's tail once more. You've proven yourself a hot hand on the stick, the lead said. I think I've punished you enough in this battle. What say you to a day's rest, and then we meet dirtside for a final confrontation? What, afraid I might end your game right now? Mick asked as he squeezed off a snapshot. It went wide. Hardly, the enemy laughed. My soldiers on the ground yearn for a battle, and you've proven yourself honorable in combat. We will give you a day to tend to your wounded, and then meet us on the planet. Consider this a temporary truce. Break it, and we will begin by targeting your medical ships. The lead broke Mick's lock and began a run back to his fleet. Order your forces to stand down, and we will follow suit. How do I know you won't just blast us out of the sky? Mick asked. You don't, the lead replied simply. But do you really believe you're the only people with honor in this galaxy? Cut the comm, Brink, Mick said. You're not seriously thinking about it, the smuggler arched an eyebrow at the rogue. Thinking about it? Yes, Mick nodded as they returned to the heat of battle. Am I sure about it? Absolutely not. Well, you'd better make up your mind quick, Brink said as he pointed out the forward armor plast. Stefan's about to get pounded. Oh, Criff, the rogue swore. He couldn't get the word stand down out of his mouth quick enough, and he watched as all 4 Imperial Star Destroyers surrounding Blue Talon opened up. All ships, Mick called frantically. Fall back to the far side of the system and stand down. That's an order. Stefan, get out of there. All ships, Stefan heard Mick call frantically over the comm. Fall back to the far side of the system and stand down. That's an order. Stefan, get out of there. Always at the last minute. Stefan groaned under the stress he was experiencing from the sudden climb he was making to avoid the fire that was coming at him. However, he was still taking numerous hits from all 4 of the Star Destroyers that had him boxed in. He was pulling all the maneuvers he knew. The inertial dampener struggled to keep up as G-forces pushed him back into the pilot's seat. He didn't even attempt to line up shots against the ships right now. But he couldn't even do it if he had the chance. Blue Talon's torpedo magazines were depleted, and the beam cannon's power cells were still recharging. The turbo lasers from the 4 Star Destroyers were not letting Blue Talon get close enough to use the saber either. He was purely on the defensive. Dad! Dylan called out from White Squall. We'll draw fire for you! You'll do no such thing, Stefan yelled under the stress he was experiencing. I will not have your mother and sisters crying over all 3 of us. You 2 get back to New Hope. That's an order. He barely heard Dylan acknowledge as he spiraled over a barrage from the Imp Star to his left, but got slammed by the one on the right. He didn't even need to see the warning on his right screen to know that Blue Talon had lost her armor covering the right arm and wing. He knew that the maneuvers he was pulling, combined with the additional hits, were taking out the components in the framework and shearing away more of the quantum armor. I won't die here, like this, he said to himself as he used his left hand to start entering what coordinates he could remember, as he continued his best to dodge what incoming fire he could. Suppose he was off his mark by just the slightest margin. If that were true, he'd never recover from the maneuver he was planning, and he felt the right arm shear away just under the shoulder armor. The beam cannon in its hand overloaded and exploded behind him as the power cells were hit by laser fire. But It was just enough distraction time for him to reach for the hyperdrive lever. He'd never jumped Blue Talon in its mobile suit mode, so now he would see if his theory was right. In the next instant, Blue Talon winked out of existence from the box the Sith destroyers had created. White Squall coming in on final approach, Rennie said as he wiped tears from his eyes. If they've... Don't talk like that, Dylan warned him as they finished lining up the ship with New Hope's hangar bay. It was Master Din's call, and Dad can handle her well enough to... Look! Rennie suddenly yelled and pointed to the starboard side. Dylan followed as he saw the pseudo-motion of hyperspace and saw Blue Talon flash into existence kilometers away from them, just in time to see a massive explosion behind the mobile suit. Dad! They both yelled as Dylan snapped White Squall out of position and onto an intercept course like she was a fighter. Vernius, get the tractors ready. New Hope, prepare for incoming. Oops. I scrolled all the way back up. Give me a second. Oh, goodness. Went all the... Sorry, something went weird. Oh, chapter 13. I must have hit the back button on accident. Let me find out where it was. There we go. Okay. Out of the way! Ari yelled as she sprinted down the hangar's upper gangway. Blue Talon was barely standing on her own, Dylan insisting that the crews place suspension cables to keep the massive suit in place. A third of her armor was blasted away, and most of the superstructure was damaged beneath. The right arm was completely sheared off at the elbow, and the shoulder joint and wing armor were riddled down to the framework beneath. The legs, which housed the sublight and hyperdrive engines, hadn't fared much better. One of the sublight engines had fried, and the exhaust fans had burned away. The massive shield that acted as part of the nose for the mobile suit's flight mode had been chipped away in places, and Ari could see bits and pieces of the launchers for the torpedoes, along with the section that held the beam saber. Already ahead of her, Dylan was running up from where they'd landed White Squall and yelling at the crews to stand back. Hold it, Ari, he yelled, not letting age and manners distract him. Everyone get back from the hatch. He then punched a section of armor, dislodging a panel, which concealed a larger control panel. He entered 5 keys in a sequence before slamming his fist down on the plunger next to the keypad. Instantly, the armored hatch gave way under several explosive bolts and shot out away from the mobile suit. Seconds later, the inner hatch opened and the inner opened upward. Dylan could already tell from the acrid smoke billowing outward that the cockpit was in no better shape. Ari came around behind Dylan and held her hands to her mouth. Stefan was slumped forward, unconscious in the pilot's seat. The only thing keeping him from falling forward was the flight harness. Several control panels had shorted out and were still putting out smoke. The control screens were dark, and the only thing that didn't seem damaged was the control sticks that were used to pilot the mobile suit itself. However, that was only because Stefan still had a death grip on them. Dylan wasted no time in pulling a vibroblade out of his robes and started to cut the harness away so he could pull his father out. "Stretcher!" he yelled as Ari helped him carry Stefan out of the cockpit and down the gangway to where the stretcher was waiting. The trials of a leader. The Sith fleet had indeed held true to their word and were currently orbiting Mist, but until after they'd ripped apart Blue Talon. Stefan was nuts jumping like he did, but at least he was still breathing. Besides, Mick could appreciate a little crazy now and then. He'd been called that on more than one occasion himself. In truth, he respected the hell out of the Jedi, though he'd never say it aloud. The Firebird was in the hangar, looking a little worse for wear, along with 2 XJ-3s, White Squall, Valiant, Blue Talon, Nick's shuttle, the Phantom, and Vince's fire spray Black Dragon. Most of the wounded were on one of the 2 medical frigates in the fleet, but the severe cases were brought straight to New Hope. A briefing was scheduled for a little over 1,600 hours from the point of the truce. Everyone needed some rest after what they'd been through. Mikron, Ari, Dylan, Renius, and Callista were in the med bay where Stefan lay, still unconscious. Mick made sure to make rounds and visit all of the other patients before checking on his friend. Playing favorites was not something he was going to let himself do. "How's he holding up?" Mick asked. Stefan floated in a back-to-tank as the others looked on. A few cracked ribs, a slight concussion from earlier in the fight, Callista said as she kept an eye on the monitors. His left arm is broken and he went through a lot of G-stresses in those maneuvers he was pulling. They put him through hell. He definitely got the worst of their attention. How long before he's able to get back in? Ari asked as she kept a hand to her face. It'll be a day at least before he's ready to fight, but that's just my opinion, Callista told them. In the end, it's going to be his body that decides whether or not he's in it. How did he even get out? Ari asked no one in particular. He plotted a straight line between them and New Hope and programmed the nav computer to shut down the hyperdrive a microsecond after he activated it, Mick said as they turned away from the Bacta tank. It's something even I wouldn't consider doing. And so he turned to look at Dylan and Rhenius. What about Blue Talon? She's out of the fight, Dylan told them, the emotion in his voice plain as day. You saw all the exterior damage. All the weapon systems are gone. Sensors, navigation, the works. She can't even move. That explosion we saw when he came out of hyperspace was the eye-field generators overloading. Mick thought about it, knowing it was going to be a hard answer, even as he asked it. How long? Months. Maybe even a few years, Dylan said as he and Rhenius started to leave the medical bay. Hang on, Mick told them. I won't stand by and let what they've done to him go unanswered, Dylan said suddenly as he turned around to face Mick. The look on Rhenius' face said the same. Really? Mick arched an eyebrow at the furious young man. And just what do you plan on doing, exactly? Taking out White Skull and vaping what's left of the Sith fleet by yourself? I'll do what I can, Dylan said quietly. His voice had an edge that Micron didn't like one bit. You will stand in that exact spot until I say otherwise, Mick snapped. The rogue's tone was not angry, but it was full of ice. It was the same tone he used when a squad member was being insubordinate when he was a commander in the New Republic Navy. Dylan's eyes went wide, but the youth remained stock still. Rhenius looked as though he'd seen a ghost. This is war, kid, Mick said, his tone cool and calculating. People follow orders, or people die. If you took off and attacked the Sith, it would break this fragile truce, and then you'd have a lot more than just Sith blood on your hands. I will not allow the actions of sons avenging their father, who will recover, by the way, to place the lives of thousands of good men and women in jeopardy. Think, Dylan. Your dad did everything he could to get back here in one piece, and he succeeded. Were he awake right now, do you think he'd want you running off on some suicidal mission of revenge? Do you think he'd want you risking your life and the lives of countless others to get even with the enemy? There was a heavy silence in the room before Dylan looked at the floor. No, sir, he ground out. Good, Mick said, his tone lightening slightly. I know how you feel, kid. I want to take it to them just as much as you do, but I know that there are others whose lives would be in danger if I did. It's a tough decision, and I hate to have to force it on you like this, but war isn't pretty. Sometimes we have to do the one thing while we feel like doing another. I understand, Dylan replied, if a bit more subdued. Stay with your father, Mick said as he headed for the door. You can do him the most good by being near him and letting him know you're there. When he reached the hatch, he beckoned for Callista and Turlon to follow. Ari had begun to head for their quarters. I'll be there in a bit, love, Mick sent to his wife. Don't be too hard on them, rogue, she sent back. Micron Din led the two young people to a nearby office and closed the door. You wanted to see us, grandfather? Turlon asked after a heavy silence. Sit down, both of you, Mick said. His tone discouraged any form of protest. I know about Einar. It was a good bit of rescuing, Turlon started with a grin. I'm not finished, Mick cut him off, the rogue's voice chilling the room about 10 degrees. What the two of you did was both reckless and selfish. If either one of you even thinks about doing something like that again, you can consider yourselves civilians and head straight home. The shock on their faces was quite evident. Callista found her voice first. I don't understand. Einar was dying. Let me ask you something, Mick said. How many people did you bring into the medbay while you were dirtside? Well, none, but it was Einar, Callista began. So he holds priority over everyone else in this war? Mick cut her off. He gets rescued first because we know him personally and he's our friend. In the time you two were gone, 30 pilots were extravehicular, and New Hope's shuttle couldn't pick them up because someone had commandeered it to pick up a friend. He let those words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. Luckily, they were picked up by various freighters and shuttles from the other capital ships, but that's not the point. The point is that we can't play favorites. Just because you have an emotional attachment to someone doesn't mean that they gain priority over everyone else. The number of people that could have died because of what you did is astronomical, and I won't let it happen again. If I go down 10 kilometers away from you and I'm on my last breath, you had better take care of those closest to where you are before you even think about coming after me. If some stranger gets a blaster bolt to the gut and drops at your feet, you had better take care of him before you take off to rescue a friend 10 kilometers away. Mick sighed. Turlon, Red Squadron died while you were away. Mick could feel the anguish roll off his grandson like a tidal wave. Kid, I'm not blaming you, and you shouldn't either. There's no way of knowing what would have happened had you been there with them. All I'm trying to say is that we can't, under any circumstances, play favorites. If we do, we're no better than the people we're fighting. I don't like coming down on the two of you like this, but it's part of me not playing favorites. If I let this slide because it's you, how would that make everyone else feel? I only ask that you think before you act. Yes, Einar was fading fast, but so were a lot of other people, and they were a lot closer than he was to pick up. Mick could see the tears beginning to form in Callista's eyes, and a part of him wanted to take it all back. But it still had to be said. Do you understand what I'm trying to tell you? The rogue asked. Callista looked horrified, but nodded. Turlon was ashen-faced and deflated, but he managed to nod also. Good. Don't beat yourselves up about it. That's my job. We'll get some grub and some rest and talk about the old man and what a hard case he is. They both wore weak smiles as they headed down the corridor, and Mick shook his head. Why did I agree to lead this crazy thing again? He lit a stick of tobacco and walked off in the direction of the cabin he and Ari shared. He needed some comfort himself. Got one to spare? Mick turned and saw Einar standing in the corridor, his hand in a sling, his face covered in bruises. Aren't you supposed to be dead? Mick asked, handing Einar a cigarette and lighting it. Einar took a drag and leaned against the bulkhead. You sound disappointed. Mick shook his head and met his friend's gaze. No, that's not it. You are family, though don't quote me on that. But what Turlon and Callista did was reckless. Einar took another drag of the tobacco. Of course it was. I remember the conduit himself doing reckless things now and then, and that act Stefan pulled with the suit, I'll call that reckless. Mick only nodded and smoked his tobacco. Risk is part of the game, and don't tell me if Ari had been in that fighter you wouldn't have come after her, Einar said, dropping the stub and putting it out with his boot. Perhaps, but she's my wife, my true love. It's different. No, Einar said, cutting him off. I know you are Turlon's grandfather, but I raised him. The bond between a Jedi and his master is strong, you know that. And now that Callista is family, you must understand why they did what they did. Even though I agree with you, my life is not worth more than anyone else's. Mick put out his tobacco and nodded. I see your point. I'll see about taking that into consideration. You're a wise man, Mick, Einar said, grinning. Yeah, just don't tell anyone, okay? Sorry. Ari had sensed the chewing out that Mikron was giving her grandson and his friend through the Force, and she quickly slipped out of the din quarters and down a side corridor, stopping Callista and Turlon as they were returning from the briefing room. Don't let his bite sting. Trust me, it'll bark with him. She opened the silence between the three of them. I thought what we did was right. Turlon opened his mouth, the flare of argument still on the tip of his tongue. Your grandfather was right about what he said. Had you been under my command, you would both be sitting in the brig right now under Article 32 of the New Republic Code of Military Justice for disobeying the direct orders of a superior. You're lucky that this is not my military and you are not my soldiers. But, Grandmama, it was Einar. We had to go. Couldn't just let him die, Turlin argued. Sweetheart. Oops. I'm gonna stop right there because we're in an ad. I'm gonna stop right there. And, take a minute and a half, get some water, get a snack. It's a great opportunity to get a snack. Alright. 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 And we are back from that ad. Okay. Welcome back. Thanks for sticking out through that ad. I appreciate it. Ads do help support the channel. And if you like the content and would like to support the channel in other ways, you could do so through bits, through subscribing, whether it's Twitch Turbo, a regular Twitch subscription, or even Prime Sub. You get one free Prime Sub every month if you have Amazon Prime that you can use for your favorite streamer. But that's up to you. Alright, where was I? Okay, here we go. Sweetheart, I understand what you're saying. It is human nature to be reckless with those who follow you and quick to sacrifice others to save those you love. Even your grandfather cannot argue that one. But a true leader understands the importance of impartiality in war. That's what makes leading so difficult. You have to turn off what makes you human. Turn off your attachments and think logically. We all get it, and nobody can say they would do differently in your position. Turlon nodded. But, all the same, your actions must be better planned in the future if you are to continue to fight in this war. Your grandfather leads, and so you must follow. Whether that be to hell and back, Ari said a little more firmly. Get some rest, and do not chide your grandfather for his words. Tomorrow is another day, she said, bidding them both good night as she slipped back to the din quarters. Mick entered their shared quarters to find them dark and silent. Babe, he silently called out. A hand slipped around his waist from behind, and he found Ari's body pressed against his back, her breath warm. I'm here, love, she whispered, moving around in front of him. He could see that she was wearing a silver silk nightgown that hung from her shoulders, the flowing fabric gently gliding over her skin. He glanced past her shoulder to see a tray full of finger foods and a bottle of Merlot, the sheets turned down on the bed. Now that's what I call a hell of a way to greet a returning warrior. He smiled as she kissed him. What can I do to make you relax? She asked, pouring him a glass of wine. He grinned as she led him towards the bed. On their way back to her quarters, Callista looked sideways at Turlon while wandering the corridors of New Hope. I'm not tired in the least. Actually, I was thinking we might get in some practice before tomorrow. He nodded, though he didn't seem particularly enthusiastic at the moment. We could use the practice, especially considering we'll be going dirt side. He then added, You should look in on the wounded first. Good idea. She turned the next corner and then continued towards the medbay. She walked in and immediately went in search of her Padawan. The young woman glanced up as Callista entered the office. "Good evening, Master. Here are the charts and the recovered pilots for you to look over." Many of the Jedi in the medbay had suffered broken bones and lacerations from the stress of going extravehicular. A few had suffered from oxygen shortage and had put themselves into healing trances as they waited for pickup. She closed her eyes briefly, silently apologizing to those Jedi she had left on her mad dash after Anar. She handed the charts back to her Padawan and bid her good night, before making a quick round of the medbay and checking on each of them. Turlon kept pace at her side as she exited the medbay. She glanced towards him. "Shall we go practice them?" He grinned. "Why not? I'll have to stop and get a pass key from Ari for the landing bay. It's empty at the moment. We can lock it down so we won't be disturbed." He nodded and grinned at her. "You do realize what we may be interrupting if we head over there?" She nodded and smiled crookedly. "It can't be helped, I suppose." It took them only a few minutes to reach Ari's quarters, and Callista pressed the door con. The door hissed open a moment later to reveal Ari standing there wrapped only in a sheet. Turlon's eyes widened. "I knew it!" Ari glared at him playfully and then glanced at Callista before tossing her a keycard. "Here's the keycard for Bay 4. Now, go away before your grandfather wakes up." She grinned and bid them good night. They grinned at each other and then proceeded down towards the landing bay. Yep, here we go. Sorry, guys. I lost my place there for a second. Oh! The pained groan woke Dylan up, lifting his head to see his father stirring on the bed across the room. "You really had us worried there," he said as he moved closer. "I feel like someone's worked me over with a Daharan," Stefan muttered as he kept his eyes closed for the moment. "Those 4 Star Destroyers," Dylan said as he picked up a glass of water. "Callista says you'll be able to come around soon." "The sooner the better," Stefan told him as he started to sit up and accept the glass. "How long?" "A few hours. You were unconscious when we pulled you out of the cockpit." "How bad is she?" Stefan asked. "She's crippled." Stefan nodded as he started slowly working his sword arm and then his left. "How long before this continues?" "A few more hours," Dylan said as he helped Stefan to his feet. "Long enough to get my muscles worked up with some practice." Callista keyed the entry to Bay 4, the doors sliding apart before them. Turlon gave a slight bow, motioning for Callista to enter first, and then he followed into the empty bay. His grandmother Z-Wing sat in the corner, strapped down to avoid rocking during hyperjumps. Brinks T-Wing, the bomber, sat adjacent to the Z-Wing. He knew his grandmother and his great-uncle would never travel without the personal fighters aboard the cruiser. "Can you believe my parents still have intimate relations?" Turlon put it kindly in a hushed tone. He was still in shock at his grandmother entering the door wrapped in a bedsheet, half hidden by the doorframe, and his grandfather asleep behind her on the bed. "They may be mentally and spiritually older than us, but they are physically only a few years older. Of course they still have relations. They love each other," Callista told him, amused. "I know they do. They're soulmates, if there were ever such a thing. Kindred spirits. I remember grandmother telling me when I was a boy about this coming war. The war where Sith would fight Jedi." "Oh, thank you. I'm shrimping." Thank you. Much appreciated. Yeah, I tend to do that when I get real focused. I did. I posture checked. Thank you. I'm also going to get a drink while I'm at it. Alright. Okay, here we go. The war when Sith would fight Jedi. She said the prophecy went like this. There would be 2 great forces of light that would overcome the one force of darkness, but should the light be separated, they would be forever dominated in darkness. I suppose that means my grandparents, the Phoenix and the Conduit, Turlon said, growing serious. Forget about that for now. Your grandparents are together as we speak. Nothing could even separate them, she replied. What did you have in mind? He quietly replied, his hands behind his back as he surveyed the empty bay. He had been extremely quiet after getting his ass handed to him by his grandfather, and it worried Callista. You all right, Turlon? She asked, her eyebrows creased with concentration and concern. Fine, was his curt reply. No, you're not. You were quiet, and you, Jedi Din, are never this quiet with me, she told him, starting to take a step closer to her friend, but he stepped away and began to pace the bay floor, deep in thought. I let him down. Grandmother, too. And my master. I let them all down. Turlon's words were slow and seemingly far away, even though he only stood a few feet away from her. No, you didn't. You came after Aenar and myself because you care for us. If it had been your father, she began. My father lived up to the Din and Luxert reputations. He died for my grandmother's beliefs, following her orders, Turlon shouted, his voice echoing in the large bay. Callista was taken aback by her friend's powerful voice. She had never seen Turlon brooding like this, so dark, so quiet, his eyes so far away. You do know what happened to my mother, don't you? Khalsa, Din? She went insane after my father's death. She's in the Vistalopo psychiatric ward on Livda. My grandmother took me, but couldn't bear the sight of me because I reminded her of my father, Kevin. Master Aenar then took me and trained me and raised me. He is my father now. They all couldn't stand to have me near them because I reminded them of my father. And now, when I want them to see my father in me, I fail. Turlon rambled on, still pacing the deck, his hands behind him as he walked, still deep in thought. Your grandfather also doesn't know how your father was after the age of 16, Turlon, but your grandmother does. She's afraid to lose you to her beliefs like your father. Callista tried to soothe his bruised ego. Turlon looked up from his pacing, a calm expression crossing his face, but his eyes still seemed far away, as if lost in 1,000 memories. My grandmother, General Ari Luxert Thrawn Din, the head of New Republic Galactic Defense, former smuggler and Jedi Master, the only woman to graduate from an Imperial piloting academy, heroine of the rebellion, the Phoenix. My grandfather, Captain Mikron Din, commander of the New Republic Silverblades, the fallen hero of the Vong Wars, former smuggler and Jedi Master, the only man to become a commander straight out of pilot training, the Conduit. My father, Kevin Mikkel Din, was the commanding sergeant of his special of his Black Ops Special Forces unit, 246 successful missions, fallen hero of the Harlean Wars. And then there's me, Turlon Din, a Jedi Knight who was a mere shadow of his namesake, Turlon quietly said, as if in defeat. He looked up to find a hand on his shoulder. It belonged to Callista. You are a Jedi Knight who is to be qualified for masterhood next year. You are a miraculous pilot like all of your family. You have the Phoenix in you. You've expressed traits from all your family. You are strong-willed and a crack shot like your grandmother. You have her understanding of military tactics. You are a die-hard pilot like your grandfather. You have his roguish ways and his temper. You look just like your father from the hollows I've seen of him, and are certainly level-headed like him from what I've heard. And as for your master, you take Aenar's calmness and quiet reflection. His level of force ability has been instilled within you, she continued, trying to lift Turlon's spirits. Well, I certainly don't have my grandmother's ability to create force shields, though you seem to. Ari said it was because of a rare genetic trait found only in a few Jedi. Force knows I adore you. You always know what to say to cheer me up. He tried one of his grandfather's trademark grins. Good. Callista gave her friend a playful shove. Enough of this moping about. It's been ages since we sparred, and I've picked up quite a bit from Zan. Care to put your skill to the test? Turlon laughed. You're asking for it. I've been watching Hollows of Grandpa and Master Card on repeat for months. His blue blade ignited, and and he took a ready stance, settling his saber on training mode so as not to hurt her. I see, she replied, and followed suit, her purple blade flaring to life. She stood a few feet from him and readied herself. She spread her feet, settling into a low inner guard position with the tip of her blade near her right shoulder. She took a moment to take some deep breaths and sank within herself, finding her center before she reached out to Turlon and the Force. Are you ready? He merely nodded. Without warning, she charged. Turlon sensed her intent a moment before her saber would have touched his shoulder and brought his saber up sideways, blocking the strike. Stepping back, she nodded. Good. Bringing her feet together, she suddenly jumped and somersaulted over him to land behind. Whirling around, he blocked a downward strike from her saber before rotating his wrist to toss her off balance. She flipped away from him, landing in a crouch 10 feet away. He grinned. Surprised you, didn't I? She merely chuckled. He nodded and settled himself again. Still crouching on the deck, she flipped the grip of her saber so the pommel rested in her palm. The hilt rode the inside of her forearm, with the blade pointed away from her. She saw Turlon tilt his head. Where did you learn that? Grinning, she replied. My master on Corellia taught me that. It's part of Form 4, and coincidentally, how a Mandalorian holds his knife. He nodded, smiling slightly, and then he settled himself on looking down for only a moment. His head came up again. He started in surprise. She had appeared before him, and he hadn't even seen her move. How? Form 4, she replied from within his thoughts. Whoa. While they were holding the conversation in their heads, she pressed her advantage. Moving inside his defense, she knocked his saber from his hand. As it flew across the bay, it suddenly reversed direction as Turlon called it back to himself. It slapped into his palm and ignited again. He then blocked her strike and forced her blade wide, hoping to throw her off balance once more. She whirled away and set herself again. He grinned. You're good. She merely nodded and suddenly charged back across the deck towards him. They joined in the middle of the bay, their blades crashing against one another. Sparks flew as her blade rode his to the hilt. Locked together, they struggled for the upper hand. She drew on the force and gently nudged him away from her. He stumbled away, his arms windmilling for a moment as he fought for balance. What was that? Grinning, Callista said. That was a little something your grandmother taught me. It's been quite useful on occasion. Turlon grinned. Well, it certainly works. They both shut off their sabers and then bowed. And then she came across the deck and leaned on his shoulder for a moment to catch her breath. I haven't had that much of a workout for a while. She hugged him. I'll be around if you want to talk later, okay? I should go find Zan and head to bed, though. Anytime you want a rematch, you know where to find me. Turlon threw a lazy salute. I've still got some aggression to work out, so I'll see you tomorrow. Stefan picked an open space on the observation deck. The stars and the large view of mist surrounded him from the viewport beyond. For a long time, he just knelt in the middle of the deck, working the stiffness out of the wrist that had been broken, slowly opening himself up to the Force again. He meditated for a time, working the soreness out from the piloting that he had pulled to escape the Sith fleet. He had already been to the hangar deck and had seen the true extent of the damage to Blue Talon, but it didn't occupy his mind or nearly concern him as much as he thought it might have. It seems so strange, but I'm not worried about it, nor should I be, he'd told Jade over the comm. All of us wanted nothing more than to be rid of these things. That's why we worked so hard not to make them powerful enough to even be a weapon. Well, you needed it for this, she had said softly. So it's just as well you've kept it this long. What will you do with it now? Just keep the remains in the hangar, Stefan had told her. I can't think of a safer place. So, how's Andrea doing? Worried about you, just as I was when we got Dylan's message. Besides that, she's learning what it's like to be a mother in waiting. Stefan smiled softly. Well, she's got someone to talk to you about all of it. Is there any news yet? Not yet, Jade told him. She wouldn't mind a daughter, but she knows a son would be just as special. and it's something she believes both grandfathers are wanting. He laughed at the comment. Whatever the Force wills for this child to be, I welcome it. Zan had met Callista outside the bay and held her to him as they returned to their quarters. Her heart was still racing from the exertion of saber practice. The ship slumbered around them, preparing for battle the following morning. The dark quarters beckoned to the tired couple as they entered. She slumped down onto the edge of their bed, removing her outer tunic. Zan began shedding his armor one plate at a time, leaving only his coverall. He then sank down down beside her on the bed. Come to bed, Tierica? She nodded. They crawled in between the sheets, and she wrapped her arms around his shoulders as she fell asleep. He lay awake for a long time, gazing at his sleeping wife. She's so beautiful, he mused to himself. He knew how her heart ached after what had happened earlier that day. She was such a caring person, and he hated seeing her distraught. The Corellian may have been a little too rough on her, even if he was right. Hold on. Did I miss something? There we go. Yeah, it wasn't giving me the thing for the next chapter. Couldn't read about that. Okay. Chapter 14. Einar walked into the observation deck and saw Stefan there meditating. He was recovering nicely from the accident. Better than Einar was from his. He walked over to his friend and knelt next to him. Neither of them said a word. Einar took a deep breath and closed his eyes before he began meditating, trying to speed up the healing process for his own injuries. Callista had been keeping an eye on him for the past few hours. He told her he was doing okay, but it hurt too much, and if he told her the truth, she would confine him to the medbay. He drew on the Force and used whatever healing techniques Ari had taught him over the years to heal his lungs and ribs. He was focusing on the more significant wounds, as he was planning to be in the final battle. Are you sure you're up for this? He heard as he opened his eyes and saw Stefan looking over at him. You took a good beating in that crash, the Katani told him. Are you sure you'll be able to handle this fight in a few hours? I'll have you there with me, Einar said with a smile. We've always fought side by side. This'll be no exception. Of course, Stefan said, nodding to the idea. Let this be when we draw sabers together again. The universe swirled in his mind's eye. Billions upon billions of stars, all pinpricks in the blanket of space, winked in and out of existence as eons passed like seconds. This war, this battle that threatened his friends and family, was a whisper in a gale. It was a grain of sand in a Tatooine desert. It was as insignificant and unimportant as the flit gnat caught in an arachnid's web on Dagobah. To the Force, none of it mattered. This war would take place because it had to. The balance was being threatened as it always was. Sentient beings lust for power, and they always will. Even those attuned to the Force fall prey to what is inside themselves. They try to bend the Force to their will, and if the Force could be personified in any way, one could say that it doesn't like that. The Force is chaos. For every life created, another is destroyed with no apparent connection. A speeder crashes, a child is born. Random acts, unconnected but by the Force. Mick saw the Force. It swirled with the galaxy and encompassed everything. Life created it, and from it, life was created. There was no one side to it, no light, no dark. Yet, it can be disturbed. He saw mist and the stars around it as a great cancer in the Force. The Jedi, in their hopeless devotion to the light, had grown strong over the years. They had placed their beliefs on the Force and created a light side through them. They did not accept the Force for what it was truly, but used their light side constantly. It caused a strain on the way things were supposed to work, and now that they were strong, it was enough to disturb the natural chaos of the Force. The Sith were the same, except for their dark side. They grew strong because the Jedi were strong. For the chaos to be restored, they had to be. Both sides needed to be thinned out or eradicated altogether. In his musings, Mick wondered if the Force could have been better off without sentient beings knowing it existed, but such thoughts would have gained him nothing. Closer, he sensed two distinct presences within the ripples of the Force. Unlike the Jedi, who were like rocks in a river, disrupting the natural flow, these two were part of the stream, and he'd have completely missed them if he hadn't known who they were. Slowly, he began to withdraw back into himself. The chaos was beautiful, and it soothed his troubled mind to an extent. But Mick Rondin knew he would never truly be content. Even though he could never truly live in the chaos of the Force, he was closer than most to understanding its nature. However, understanding and actually abiding by it were two very different things. Mick himself was neither light nor dark, but he fought with the Jedi regardless, not because he liked them better than the Sith, but because his friends fought for them. Mick Ron could honestly care less about the war's outcome as long as his friends survived and were happy. He would protect them all at any cost. "You know, you're really slipping," Mick Ron heard Nick Yar say. "Keep it up and you'll be completely respectable." Mick lit a cigarette and stood from where he knelt in the unused shuttle hangar aboard New Hope. "You're dreaming, Space Cadet." The rogue smiled as he turned to see both Nick and Vince sitting on a stack of cargo crates. "The day I turn respectable is when one of you two settles down." "It's never gonna happen," Vince replied, pulling a bottle of Carillion whiskey from his long black trench coat. "Exactly," Mick grinned, sitting on one of the crates facing the pair. Nick reached out in the Force and pulled a crate to the middle of their circle. He then reached into his flight jacket pocket and pulled out a deck of sabacc cards and a box of cigars. "So, what the criff are you doing anyway, Mick?" he asked as he shuffled. "Commander of a fighter squad, I can see. You always were a fighter jock at heart, but leading a bunch of goody-goody Jedi in a holy crusade against the Sith? What the hell happened to you?" "Nick," Mick sighed as Vince poured him a tumbler of whiskey, "you know me fairly well." "Better than I'd like to," Nick cut in. "Yeah," Mick agreed. "So you know the answer to that question." Nick looked at Vince, and both of them nodded. "We've tried to tell you I don't know how many times," Vince said as Nick started to deal. "You can't protect your friends from everything. You were lost for 40-some-odd years because you were trying to protect them, and now this? I mean, come on, buddy," Nick said as he finished dealing and lit up one of his cigars. "You keep this up and you're going to get yourself killed." "Why the hell are you two here?" Mick asked as he looked at his hand. He threw two away. "We're here because we enjoy a good fight," Nick shrugged. He dealt Vince one card, Mick his two, and took two for himself. "And because we saw what happened to Ari when you were gone," Vince admitted. "Heh, -22. Pure sabacc." Mick laid his cards down. "I've been working on that." "And because we saw what happened to everyone else," Nick said. "Idiot's array." Vince scooped the cards up and shuffled. "What do you mean by that?" Mick asked. "A lot changed after you left," Vince said as he dealt. "Nick and I almost retired." "You're kidding." Mick looked aghast. He looked at his cards and frowned. He threw two away. "You've got this presence about you," Nick shrugged. He kept his cards. "I don't want to boost your already inflated ego, but losing you hurt damn near everybody you were around, friend or not. Hell, we even saw Corin Horn at your funeral." "I think I saw him once." Mick arched an eyebrow. "And that was in passing at Starfighter Command." He tossed his cards on the table. "Ugh, 17. "Precisely our point," Vince said. Nick shook his head in defeat and laid down his cards. "That beats my 15. "Yeah, he heard about you from Wedge. He barely knew you, yet he showed up to pay his respects. Basically, Vince said, grinning. Things went straight into the proverbial bucket of hut drool when you left for that mission and didn't come back. Where am I to not see that happen again? He laid down his cards. 22. You're not dealing again, Mick said as he scooped up the cards and began shuffling. So what are you guys saying? I should stop trying to protect the people I care about? And I'm stopping right there because we're in an ad. Oh dear. Sorry, guys. Alright. Alrighty. Waiting for that ad to go away. We still got 30 seconds. Alright. Alright. Okay. Okay. I want to back up a little bit because I realized I was reading during the ad break. You're not dealing again, Mick said as he scooped up the cards and began shuffling. So, what are you guys saying? I should stop trying to protect the people I care about? Nothing of the sort, Vince replied as Mick dealt. We're saying you should let the people you care about take more care of themselves, Nick said as he looked at his cards. They're not completely helpless, you know. Believe it or not, they can survive without you saving them all the time. I'll take one card. I can't back out of this thing, guys, Mick sighed. He gave Nick his card, Vince two, and took one for himself. We're not asking you to, Vince told him. We're just trying to get you to see what we're seeing, Nick agreed. And when this is over, maybe you'll realize we're right and start relaxing. He laid down his cards. 20. Shasa, Vince hissed as he tossed his cards in the pile. 19. He looked at Mick. We're with you now to make sure you make it through this thing in one piece. Afterward, we go back to what we do best. And I suggest you think about the same. Are we going back to smuggling? Mick asked as he, too, laid down his cards. 22. It sure beats the alternative, Nick replied as he gathered the cards and shuffled again. That being, Mick gave the room rat a trademark grin. We strap you to an easy chair and force you to watch old Senate hearings till you do. Vince gave the rogue a predatory smile. Mick looked at his hand. It was an ace of staves, a two of staves, and a commander of staves. Pure sabak on the deal. It's hard hearing my own advice bounce back at me, the rogue conceded. I was telling Ari something very similar, and I think you two are right. Of course we are, Nick exclaimed. Listen to this guy. You'd think he was a Tatooine moisture farmer. He threw away 2 cards, gave Vince one. Mick shook his head and then dealt himself 2. What do you think the odds of us all surviving this are? Mick asked. As long as the odds of you beating my hand, Vince replied as he laid down the ace of flasks, the commander of flasks, and a 2 of flasks. Pure sabak. Mick laid down his cards. What does it mean when I tie? The rogue asked. A better question, Nick said as he laid down the ace of coins, the commander of coins, and the 2 of coins. What are the odds of this happening? The 3 looked at each other and then at the cards before Mick shrugged and lit another cigarette. It doesn't matter, he said. I never much cared for odds, and I plan on beating them today anyway. They left the cards where they were and headed for the briefing room aboard New Hope. They were having a meeting before they all headed dirtside for the final confrontation. Yeah, I could be a smuggler again, The rogue smiled as he walked down the halls of the cruiser. Alright. Alright. She stood with Stefan beside her, trying her best to appear as she once had years before, a Jedi Master. She wore a black, fitted jumpsuit with a tan overvest that reached down to her ankles. Her belt around her waist held her lightsaber and her blaster. Her black smuggler's boots that came up to just below her knees sheathed her tiki blade on the left boot. Her Koshakian medallion hung around her neck, proudly displayed above her clothes instead of hidden beneath them. She was letting go. Easy now. Bring it around smoothly and not too fast. Ari's soft voice instructed. Remember, slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. Get the technique and the speed will come. Turlon, Callisto, and several other younger, less trained Jedi were in the empty landing bay aboard New Hope, practicing lightsaber techniques. Turlon, you're white-knuckling the hilt. Relax. Loosen your grip on the blade, and widen your stance a bit, Stefan instructed the young man. Turlon complied and saw an approving nod come from his grandmother. The sole purpose of perfect lightsaber technique is not to see how quickly or heavily you can bring your blade down upon your opponent, but rather how smooth and flowing your motions are, how in tune with the Force you are. Concentrate not on your enemy, not on hate or anger, not on fellow Jedi, not even on joy or happiness, but on the Force itself. Once you immerse yourself within it, your actions will flow and your timing will be perfect. Ari explained, taking a moment to move Callista's hips more in line with her center. She then adjusted Turlon's shoulders once more as she and Stefan perused among the young Jedi practicing, correcting saber technique, stance, and footwork. They are not ready, brother, she whispered to Stefan. I don't believe they will ever be ready, my dear. They did not grow up in the generations we did, with fear and loathing, Stefan replied calmly. With Sith hunting us to extinction. Ari quietly remembered the day Darth Vader's troops attacked and destroyed the Jedi Temple on Coruscant when she was only 9. She bid Stefan goodbye. She departed the makeshift training room and headed up to the bridge, where the older Jedi were quietly and calmly handling the controls. She laid her hands on the bridge railing, overlooking the vast forward armor-plast viewport on the cruiser, her fingers trailing along the intricate woodworking of the railing as she gazed at the stars. Warm hands ran around her waist and over her now slightly bulging belly as warm lips touched her neck. I wish it didn't have to be like this, she whispered to her husband as Mikron held her from behind. They took a moment to look at the stars before them. You know, you don't have to lie to me, he replied. You're more upset than you won't be down in the dirt with me. Ari rolled her eyes. I've sent word to Major Maxwell and President Donach that my resignation will be forwarded to them upon my return to Coruscant, she said. Mikron was silent for a moment. He had waited to hear those words for over a year, pleading with his wife, fighting with her, trying to convince her to retire from the stressful position of the New Republic's head of galactic defense. But he knew it would be hard for her to release control to someone else, someone less than. She had devoted her life to the military and given her all to the Republic. She had improved the military and the Senate and protected millions of lives. Yet, despite his misgivings, Mick felt quiet peace from his wife. Is this what you want? You aren't retiring because I want you to? He asked quietly. I've been speaking with Nick and Vince. I asked them to come out here, not because of this war, but to speak with you. I suppose they've told you all the business I've given them to aid the Republic? Yeah, they were sure to let me know how much money they'd gotten out of my wife since I'd been gone. Mick stifled a laugh. Never mind that. They came because I wanted them to speak to you. They knew of my plans to retire months ago, but I wasn't ready to tell you. I trust they told you my thoughts about you rejoining the Navy in a squadron command position, even though I asked them not to. They'd mentioned it. Babe, I was only going to re-enlist because you wouldn't retire. It was the only way I could be close to you on Coruscant. Plus, you know I'm good at it. That said, Nick and Vince have offered quite a fetching deal. Return to smuggling. I know. Brink has retired from the Navy, and so has Nib. She gave me her resignation before we were attacked on Coruscant. They returned to their home on Livda. I'd love for us to go back to our home on Coruscant. It's been so long since it's really felt like home, and I want to feel that again. She turned around to face her husband after a moment. If you want to go home, then home is where we'll go after all this is over, Mikron agreed, smiling. He brushed her hair out of her face. I love you so much, she replied, throwing her arms around her husband's neck. She was truly, positively happy. She kissed him multiple times on the cheek, the lips, and the forehead before she pulled away. Okay, not in front of the troops, Mikron joked as his wife pulled back from her kissing assault. Her smile faded, and Mikron wondered why. I want all of us to come home, she said, laying her husband's hand on her stomach so he could feel his unborn daughter kick. Mikron knew what she meant. She wasn't talking about Charlan or Callista. That was a given. Just as Stefan would return to Catan to his family, and Aenir would float somewhere between Livda and the Jedi Academy on Chandrila, Ari was talking about him. She couldn't lose him again in another war where she couldn't be by his side. I'll come back to you, Mick promised quietly. He kissed her again before leaving to prepare the Jedi to board their transports that would land on the planet below. Okay. There's a little bit of skipping around here. Yeah, there's a bit of a skip around time-wise. Standing beside Turlon in the cavernous bay, Callista sank into herself and the Force as she practiced. She knew they would never be fully prepared for what lay ahead, but that couldn't be helped. This was war. Whether you were prepared or not, you still went into battle. Calm radiated off of her as she moved slowly through the kata under the watchful eyes of Stefan and Ari. Turlon, on the other hand, was nervous. He had never fought hand-to-hand on such a large scale. How can he be so calm, seeing the forces arrayed against us? He said to her. I have known all my life that this day would come when the Force sought to balance itself. The Force has no sides. We give it boundaries it is not meant to possess. Our growing power caused the Sith to increase in power themselves. A confrontation was bound to occur in this type of situation. She could feel amusement in his mental tone as he said, You're starting to sound like my grandfather. She chuckled. That isn't such a bad thing. Turlin grinned and shook his head before focusing on the kata once more. This will be much less formal than our previous briefings, Mick began. Everyone was seated around a large circular table. Nick and Vince were to Mick's left. Ari was to his right. The leaders of all the representative groups were arranged loosely around the rest of the table. Mick wore a warm weather combat suit. Durasteel and cortosis ore had been forged into plates sewn into the flexible, skin-tight suit. The plates covered vital areas of the anatomy. Over the suit, he wore his black boots, gun belt, and freighter captain's vest. Most of the Jedi wore about the same, except for a Jedi cloak here and there. Vale and her entourage looked positively vicious in their tribal war gear. There were nods around the table, and Mick continued his little speech. In just over an hour, we will touch down on the world of Mist. The landing zone has been loaded into all of our transport navicomputers. We'll be putting down on the far side of the crystal mist, south of the only speck of civilization on the planet. As the name suggests, the crystal mists are a giant bog covering a good-sized portion of the planet. They've always been viewed in a quasi-mystical light by anyone who's ever been brave enough to live there. In ancient times, Mist was a Sith-held world, and the Sith of Mist would go into the crystal mist, searching for treasures hidden in the fog. Lightsaber crystals. Mick let his words hang in the air for a moment before plunging into the rest of the history lesson. It's a phenomenon that his scientists and scholars stumped for millennia. Somehow the crystals form amid the mist and shine through the fog like stars through a cloud. It can be very misleading, and many are the tales of brave souls that enter the mists and never return. As he spoke, a hologram appeared in the center of the table, showing a map of the area Mick had just described. The Sith will be marching from the scientific outpost due north of the mists. A red circle appeared on the map above the outpost. The landing zone is marked in blue to the south. We'll be meeting them at the very heart of the Crystal Mist. Their leader has proven a cunning warrior, but anyone can see that this is no play on strategy. We meet in the Crystal Mist, on a battlefield far from any civilization like the Jedi and Sith of old. It's fairly straightforward. We march into the mist, the leaders of each side meet in the middle to discuss terms of engagement, and then we charge. The hollow map faded into nothingness, and Mick glanced around the room at the calm faces before him. There is no game plan for this kind of thing. The rogue sighed. We meet, we fight. I called this briefing so that we may choose the 3 that will meet with the Sith leaders before the battle. Well, you're one of them, Nerferder, Nick said in a matter-of-fact tone. I believe Matriarch Vale should be the second, Stefan said. We should try to have someone representing each of the groups that make up our little army. Agreed, Mick nodded. If no one objects, I'd like to have Stefan as the 3rd representing the Jedi. There were nods of agreement around the table, and Mick flashed the Katani a scoundrel smile. Stefan rolled his eyes, and Mick could see his shoulders rise and fall in a sigh. Then it's settled, the rogue said as he slid data cards across the table to everyone. On those cards are the arrangements of everyone's landing areas and a general layout of the marching order. If there's nothing else, this briefing is adjourned. We leave in 20 minutes. There were no amendments, and everyone began to file out of the room. Everyone, except for Nick, Vince, Brink, and Ari. The 4 moved to surround Mick as he stood to head for his transport. What's this? He asked as he caught the stern looks on their faces. This, Vince replied as he leaned back on the table, is some friendly intervention. We're here to tell you a few things, Nick added, one of them being that you will survive this war. We need you to come back, Ari said. I know that, the rogue started. No, Brink cut him off. We know you, Mick. Probably better than you know yourself. For one, Vince spoke up, you're Corellian. No point in denying it. You hold no stake in the odds anyway. Which are usually stacked against you, Nick added. 2, you're a hero at heart despite being a pirate and a rogue. You really want to save the galaxy whether you admit it or not. And 3, Ari said as she laid a hand on his arms, you love your friends and family more than anything else. We know you'd walk into an incinerator if you thought it would save us some pain. But what you have to realize is that we'd rather suffer a bit and have you alive than live the rest of our lives without pain and not have you around. So what are you saying? Mick asked, slightly exasperated. You want me to pull out of this thing? Nothing of the sort, Vince answered. We know we couldn't keep you from fighting even if we tried. But we can keep you alive, Nick said as he twirled the hilt of his saber. Ari and Brink will be waiting for you in the bird at the system's edge. Vince and I will go down with you dirtside. We're going to be your shadows. Wherever you go, we'll be there, Vince nodded. And should the battle turn for the worse, we can make sure you make it out alive. I don't know what to say, Mick looked across the room at his friends. You don't have to say a thing, Rogue, Ari smiled. They'd follow you to hell and back, dragging you kicking and screaming. The rogue sighed. It's not going to be pretty. Nick and Vince laughed. Just the way we like it. Micron flashed them all a scoundrel smile before saying, I wouldn't have it any other way, but if you guys allow it, I have 10 minutes before I have to board that transport. I want to spend them with my wife. Sure thing, Nerferder, Nick said as he and Vince headed for the door. Ari, the Firebird will be ready and waiting, Brink said as he followed after them. The door slid shut behind them and Mick turned to Ari. You know, he said, in days of old it was customary for a lady to give her knight a favor before he headed off into battle. A scarf, a necklace, some kind of trinket so he would have her protection and luck when he went off to war. Really? Ari arched an eyebrow as Mick pulled her into his arms. When did you become such an expert on archaic traditions? I did some research on the hollow last night, he admitted. He then shrugged. But I'll settle for a good luck kiss. I'll give you one better, Ari said, removing the Kashakian medallion from around her neck. Mikaran watched as the medallion gently split into two separate half-circle pieces that fit together to form the medallion Ari had always worn. Mikaran had never seen her remove it from around her neck, not even in the fresher. It stayed with her always, something she cherished and loved more than anything because her father had given it to her the last time she'd seen him alive. This half is Kashakian for Honor the Warrior. It will bring you luck and protect you, she said, running a cord through the warrior half of the medallion and hanging it gently around her husband's neck. What does your half say? He asked, admiring the half-piece she'd handed him. Healer of the sick and wounded, she replied. They certainly are you, Mikaran said. This medallion means more than a breath of air to me, she began, but Mikaran cut her off. Don't worry. I'll bring it back to you in one piece. He grinned as she kissed him more deeply than he'd ever known. Grandfather, came Turlan's voice, interrupting the kiss. Mikaran looked over to see Turlan wearing black leather pants and a dark brown tunic bloused at the waist with a tan sash. The lightsaber Ari had given him swung on his belt. His black leather boots were laced to just below his knees, and he had a black bandana tied around his forehead. His short-cropped dark brown hair poked out above. Mikaran's glare told the kid all he needed to know about interrupting a kiss. Mainly, don't. The transport is waiting, Turlan said sheepishly before ducking out of the room. Mikaran turned back to Ari and held her tightly before kissing her forehead and following Turlan. Stefan finished his infinity arc as he came around to end the kata he had started. Many things were on his mind, but what surprised him was that the coming battle was not one of them. He thought of the path he'd strived to walk. Things had never been easy, and easy would not have been the Jedi way, something Corran Horn had told him once. He had more to think about now. Events had left many of his fellows dead, and more of them had left students behind. They would need guidance now, and he believed it was time for them to study a new way of thinking. It seemed like ages since he'd begun this new study, reading Jason Solo's writings, his father's texts, and even more ancient writings of his people. Even his ancestor, Joey Card, had taken on a way of thinking of the Force similar to what Stefan was currently coming to believe. That there was no light nor dark to the Force itself. It was only in the hearts and minds of the people who studied it. In a moment of reflection, he knew things would need to change. It was not be a complete change, but one that would take time nonetheless. And he'd already begun to plan his first steps. There were many students left on Catan. Near Edmonton was the ancient empty monastery of Mount Adon. It was perfect for Stefan to teach this new way of thinking to future generations as he had started to do with his own children. And yet, there was another matter on his mind. He would soon be a grandfather and finish Renius's teachings. The time had finally come when he couldn't travel throughout the galaxy to ensure a peaceful future. It was time for him to pass on what he had learned and entrust the role that he'd taken as a guardian for so long to the next generation. Dylan, Turlan, Zan and Callista, Renius, and so many more young Jedi. Stefan? He turned to see Ari in the doorway, looking at him. Are you all right? Yes, I'm just thinking of many things, he told her as he stood up. Ari, have I ever told you how much you've meant to this family? No, she said as she closed the distance, her concern showing now. Stefan, what's wrong? Just an old warrior contemplating what he's to do after all of this. You're not that old, she joked. Compared to you? No, he said with a laugh. But with what Mick did with you, you'll be around probably longer than I will. Now hush, she said as she hugged him. You're going to make it through all of this. You know me, sister, he said with a grin. I always enjoy a good fight, but after this I can't go all over anymore. I understand, she said as they started to leave the room. Come on, we've got a new fight to win. Okay. Alright. Stefan began to whisper prayers in his native language as he finished putting on his outer kimono and applying fresh bandages to the wounds that needed them. He picked up his belt, which had only his lightsaber attached, and put it around his waist before securing the buckle. Father, watch over my family with a ready sword. Mother, whisper to them that I long to return to them. Guide my hand this day, for I have lived my best with the honor and dignity you taught me. Give me the strength to protect those I hold dear and to defeat those who would destroy everything I love. He threw a sleeveless robe over the ensemble and left the hood down. He then drew up the sleeves of his kimono to free his hands for the fight to come. Dear lady, if I should fall in battle, let it be with honor. Ease the passing of those who will fall this day and be with their loved ones to comfort them. He sighed as he finished the lines a warrior would recite on the eve of battle, closing his eyes and letting the force flow through him before he left his quarters and went down to the hangar. Let my conscience be clear, he thought as he walked up the boarding ramp. Dylan and Renius were already there and ready to leave. And so the end begins. Subconsciously, Micron felt for the medallion against his chest. The cool metal felt good against his skin, and the nagging thoughts in the back of his mind slowly faded into calm. What's our ETA? Mick asked the Jedi who was piloting the transport. 5 minutes, sir, the pilot replied. And the others? Minok and Dream will touch down a minute after we do, followed by the other 4 a minute after that. Good, Mick nodded as he took a seat just after the cockpit and strapped in. He never really trusted anyone else's flying anyway. The command staff were in the forward hold of the ship. Matriarch Vale, Stefan, and Mick were in the forward seats with Nick and Vince not far behind. Those two had really taken to the role of Micron's personal bodyguards. The rogue flashed them all a trademark smile. Loosen up, guys, he said. You all look like you're about to face the biggest challenge of your lives. Mick? Stefan answered. We are. Oh yeah, Mick feigned ignorance. I forgot. We are so dead, Mick sighed. The others smiled. The laughter would come later. My lord, the center specialist called. We have 7 dropships vectoring for a point 2 clicks south of our position in the portion of the crystal mists. Good, the master grinned wickedly. He wore black armor, somewhat reminiscent of stormtrooper armor without the helmet. It was painted matte black, and Cortosis ore was woven into the plates. Around his shoulders was a deep black cloak, and the hood shadowed his face. How very punctual of the conduit. What is their ETA? 2 minutes until all of their ships are on the ground, my lord. Issue the orders, soldier. The master nodded as he strode out of the small building. I go to lead our forces on the last march of the Sith. As you will it, my lord. His subordinate's voice had been full of zeal and pride, and the master allowed his grin to broaden as he made his way to the head of the Sith formation. All units, march! With a brilliant war cry, his army began to move into the crystal mists. They had just gotten into formation. Mick Rondon, Matriarch Vale, and Stefan Card led the small army of Jedi, with Nick and Vince close behind. There was a sound like distant thunder, and Mick knew the Sith army was marching towards them. All units! The rogue cried. March! Silently, the Jedi trudged through the mists until they reached a clearing in the bog that was flat, dry land. The formation came to a halt at Mick's command. The fog rolled in waist-height, and Mick could no longer see his feet. However, the view ahead was clear, and the view around was also clear. He could sense mist makers hovering at the edge of the clearing. They have never seen this many warm bodies in one place, Mick thought. They won't venture anywhere near us. He turned his attention back to the front, and an emotion ran through him that he was all too unfamiliar with. Fear. Breaking through the line of trees on the other end of the field were thousands upon thousands of Sith, most clad in black, and at the front of the army marched 3 men. The first, the center, the master moved with a confidence Mick wished he was feeling. Flanking him on either side were warriors who stood a good head taller than their master. They wore the armor of the Emperor's old royal guard, but it was dyed black and didn't shine in the little light coming through the perpetual mist. The Sith army came to a precise halt on the other side of the field, merely 300 meters away. The trio in front continued walking towards the center of the field. Mick reached down into the force and let it flow through him. He couldn't lose himself completely, yet, but he slowly began letting himself fall. He touched the medallion around his neck and smiled. Yes, it would be a fight, but he was going to win. The rogue nodded to Stefan and Vale, and the three walked out to meet their enemy. As Micron fell deeper and deeper into the force... Oops, and I'm going to stop right there because we're in an ad. Gotta stop right there because we're in an ad. Okay. Yep, 46 seconds. Alright. Okay. Alright, and we're back. Sorry, I overlapped the ads a little bit there. Here we go. The rogue nodded to Stefan and Vale, and the three walked out to meet their enemy. As Micron fell deeper and deeper into the force, he began to get a sense of the forces arrayed against him. There was something there that seemed incredibly familiar, and yet distorted somehow. It was like a figure but viewed through a translucent glass, a form in his mind's eye that wouldn't focus. And then they were there. I'm glad to see the Jedi have honor, the Master spoke first, and the voice from beneath the hood sent ice coursing through Mick's veins. In an instant he knew who stood before him, and in that same instant he desperately hoped he was wrong. He's dead, Mick thought. I killed him, with the blaster at my side right now. I shot a hole through his chest. Yes, we have, Stefan replied, covering his friend's sudden inability to speak. But you do not only face Jedi in this battle. Know that others have joined our ranks, all of them Force users and opposed to you and your kind. Yes, the Master waved a hand idly. We knew the witches and the Jensari had joined your little fleet, and we welcome the added numbers on your side. We are here to discuss terms, and I would hear yours. The matriarch spoke first. We have med tents arranged at our landing site, she said. You will not attack them, and we will not attack your medical facilities. I can agree with that, the Master nodded. Was there anything else? Our families will be left alone, Stefan said evenly. Whatever the outcome of this war, civilians and non-combatants shall be left entirely alone. Honestly, the Master replied, you Jedi are so melodramatic. Of course, we won't go after your families and expect the same from you. If you're done telling me what I already know, perhaps you could give me some real terms so I can rejoin my army and we can begin this battle? The wit, the sarcasm, the tone. Stefan looked at Mick and then at the Master. The build, the height, even the stance. Here are my terms, you twisted wretch, Micron finally spoke. You go back to your army and you lead their charge. I will meet you in the middle and finish what I started all those years ago. The Master laughed, but the gesture was not warm. He pulled back his hood, and both Stefan and Vale gasped. Before them stood Micron Din, a clone of the man who stood with them. You and I are both made of the same stuff. Micron Din locked eyes with Mick. You should have known it would take more than a blaster to destroy me. This is a mistake I won't be repeating, the rogue said as lightning flashed in his eyes. He turned on his heel and strode back to the Jedi army, all the while falling deeper into the Force. Stefan and Vale were at his side in a moment. Mick, Stefan asked. Leave him to me, the rogue answered without looking. Stay clear and keep our friends alive. Stefan began to protest, but they were at the front of the formation again, and Mick called out above the crowd. The will of the Force! The rogue ignited his silver blade and faced the enemy. Nick and Vince fell into position at his side. Nick's gold blade hummed to life, followed by Vince's crimson. Mick's battle cry echoed through the ranks, and the energy in the air was thicker than the mist of this forsaken planet. Stefan could feel the hair stand up on his arms, and he glanced at Mick Rondin. Energy visibly coursed in and around the rogue, blue lightning tracing his entire body. In a flash, as quick as lightning strikes, the conduit charged. Give me one sec. It's a quiet evening. I don't know. Alright. Hope everybody's enjoying. So sorry about the crashing earlier. I don't know what that was about. But at least I hadn't started reading at that point. That would have been awkward. It was just chit-chatting. So at least there's that. Pretty sure it was the weather. The weather appears to be a little crazy. But we're back. And I'm going to stay here until we finish this chapter. Because it's only fair. So. Alright. New Hope. Repulsor lifts are warmed up. We're ready to depart, Brink told Ari as she watched the transports leave the bay for open space and the surface of the planet below. Force speed, Ari whispered to herself before turning to Callista. Brink and I will be on the Firebird, but when the time comes to make a landing to collect the wounded, call me and I'll go with you. We'll take the Firebird to the surface. It will be much faster. Of course, I would feel better having a master healer with me, Callista agreed, before she hugged Ari tightly. He'll come back. I haven't foreseen Zan's loss as I did my son's, Kevin, in the Harleyan Wars. He'll come back to you, she whispered to the young woman, clutching her tightly. I know. I can't help but worry, she replied. A natural thing for a woman in love, Ari said, smiling as she kissed Callista on the cheek and turned to join Brink aboard the Firebird. She rounded the corridor to the cockpit and found Brink already at the controls, raising the boarding ramp. She plopped down on the chair beside him, sudden remorse and darkness filling her heart as Brink took the old Corellian freighter out into a flanked wingman position beside the massive cruiser. Ari closed her eyes and touched her half of the medallion, drawing strength in her heart as if she knew her husband was touching his at the exact same moment. He'll be all right, Shistraka, Brink tried to soothe her. It's not him I'm worried about, Ari replied, her eyes opening as she looked out the forward armor blast. The last ship's faint iron trails were seen entering mist atmosphere as they started the landing procedures. In her native Kashakian tongue, she began to whisper the war prayer she had heard her mother whisper whenever her father had to deal with disturbances on Kashak with the other guardians. When the dark wood fell before me and all the paths were overgrown, when the priests of pride say there is no other way, I tilled the sorrows of stone. I did not believe because I could not see, though you came to me in the night. When the dawn seemed forever lost, you showed me your love in the light of the stars. Recognizing the ancient Kashakian prayer, Brink began to recite it with her. Then the mountain rose before me by the deep well of desire, from the fountain of forgiveness, beyond the ice and fire. Though we share this humble path alone, how fragile is the heart. Oh, give these clay feet wings to fly, to touch the face of the stars. Breathe life into this feeble heart. Lift this mortal veil of fear. Take these crumbled hopes, etched with tears. We'll rise above these earthly cares. Cast your eyes on the ocean. Cast your soul to the sea. When the dark night seems endless, please remember me. They finished the prayer together and sat in silence for a few moments. Brink's hand quietly slipped into his sister's, squeezing it tightly as they watched and waited. Okay. Einar brought the Valiant out of the hangar bay. He hadn't left with Stefan and Mick because Callista had held him back, wanting to examine him again. His ribs were almost fully healed, and the lungs were still sore, but better. Though he still couldn't use his right hand, there were alternatives to fighting. He watched transport after transport headed for Mist, bringing Jedi, healers, and troops. He set the controls for atmospheric entry and sat back while the ship took him to the prearranged coordinates. Good evening. Welcome in. It's good to see you. Yes, popcorn. Also this. Don't forget to hydrate with all the popcorn. It's super important. Welcome back. Einar closed his eyes and drew on the Force, preparing himself for the coming battle. To Sniper, that's a coworker of mine. She's fine. She's okay. I see you lurking over there. You're staring at everybody in the chat. I see you. But it's okay. It's all good. Yeah, I'm gonna stay here till I finish this chapter because it's only fair. But of course, as you should be. Turning away as the Firebird departed, Callista fought back tears. She knew that many would die today. That was the way of things. She tamped down on her anguish. It wouldn't do for her to do anything reckless. Mick had already warned her once. She made her way swiftly back to her post. There was much to do. While she had been at the briefing, the medbay had been rearranged. Extra cots and equipment lined the walls, effectively doubling the capacity. They would have to house and care for the wounded until the fleet could return to Livda. Knowing that she wouldn't sleep much for the next day or so, she engaged in brief, energizing meditations to keep her energy up. Mist. The ship set down on Mist, and Einar shut her down and headed for the living compartment. He opened the closet and pulled out a dark jumpsuit, part of a present from Stefan back when everyone wanted to kill them years ago. The suit was padded, and communication systems were built into the left shoulder. Over the suit, he attached a light composite chest plate and hand armor. His lightsaber and Geonosian sonic blaster fit perfectly into his jumpsuit. No lightsaber could deflect its blast. 3 thermal detonators, a vibroblade, and a pair of binders also fit alongside them. He opened a small pouch and extracted a vibro-knuckler and put it on his left hand. He grinned as he looked at himself in the mirror. Stefan always goes a little over the top, but it looks like this might finally come in handy. He exited the ship and locked her down. He could see Mick, Stefan, and the others ignite their blades and charge. He winced in pain as he reached for his lightsaber with his broken arm and ignited it. He thought of an old Nubian battle cry and smiled as he ran into the crowd. "For Queen and Country!" Stefan heard the battle cry just as he reached the front lines and almost caught him off guard as the first Sith charged him. Not today, he thought as he threw the Sith blade upward, brought his back down, and cut the man down from shoulder to hip. Another came in behind that one, whirling his blade around. Stefan only pointed his blade towards him, and the Sith impaled his own throat of Stefan's lightsaber. "You cannot let this happen." He heard his father's words as he surrendered more and more of himself to the Force and kept fighting. "This galaxy has known too much conflict. You cannot let a scourge like that of Palpatine come again, my son. This must end and balance be restored." "And so," Stefan said as he grabbed a charging Sith by the arm and used the momentum to hurl him to the ground before impaling him with his lightsaber, "I give my all to this." Several more came at him, and Stefan fought with renewed strength after the ordeal of escaping from the 4 Star Destroyers above. He could feel everyone's presence through the Force and found Einar struggling to keep up with the Sith charging him. Stefan fought through the line, taking down those angling at him until he reached where Einar was and intercepted the next coming towards him. Shoving his blade upward, he caught the man across the neck, severing the arteries. "What do you think you're doing here? You're still injured," he asked Einar between blows and fighting off more and more as they came. "Did you think I would let you fight alone?" Einar asked as he blocked one blow and jabbed his vibroblade into the Sith's belly. "Always together, brother. Always together." "Then let us finish this," Stefan said as they continued to help their own. "Eyeliner! Miss Ma'am. Welcome in." "I see you." "Welcome in." I'm just finishing up my chapter for the evening. Well, it's good to see you. Stefan and Einar struggled to clear a way towards the young Jedi Knight struggling to fend off his own attackers. Einar raised his vibroblade and threw it, hitting a Sith in the back just under the shoulder. He used the Force to twist the blade and sent the Sith to his knees, screaming in agony until he passed out. Stefan shot him a confused look. "There is no need to slaughter them all. We would be no better than our enemy." Stefan nodded in agreement at Einar's message, and they continued towards the Jedi Knight. Stefan brought his blade up as soon as he was in range of the one Sith and severed his hand, sending the Sith's double-bladed lightsaber flying. Einar then used the Force and slammed the Sith downwards, knocking him out. The young Jedi was still facing two Sith and managed to stay alive by evading their strikes. He had been severely hurt and wouldn't last much longer in a fight. Einar ran forward, crouching, holding his blade low. The two Sith stopped and brought their blades low to intercept Einar. When he got within range, Einar suddenly jumped and twisted horizontally, severing their heads and landing on the other side. He fell to his knees then, clutching his right hand just as Stefan approached, followed by the young Jedi, who pulled Einar to his feet. "I didn't know you could do that, old man," Stefan said, grinning. "Yeah, I'm full of surprises," Einar said, looking for another dose of painkillers to inject himself with. "You shouldn't be out here, Master," the young Jedi said, bringing a nod from Stefan. "Nonsense. Now you get over to the med tents, and that's an order," Einar said to the young man. "Yes, Master. May the Force be with you, and you, Master Card." The young knight bowed and started off towards the medical tents. "So, are you ready for more?" Einar asked Stefan with a big grin. "Let's get him," Stefan said as they plunged back into the fray. Einar took those on the left while Stefan handled the Sith that came at them from the right. One Sith leapt in from above and brought his blade down towards Stefan, but he batted it aside. The warrior came around to strike from the right, but Stefan turned with the block and impaled the man with his blade as he took the fallen warrior's lightsaber in his left hand. With both blades, he fought on and kept Einar's back clear as the two moved through the crowd. "Close in on Dylan and Turlon," Stefan told Einar as he started taking two Sith with his blades. "There's safety in numbers." He blocked high, then low, before hammering them back with a force blow. They came in again, and Stefan rolled underneath their strikes and cut them both down along the spine before rolling to his feet. "Let's go." Oh, almost done. Okay. New Hope. The comm blared a priority signal, bringing Callista back to reality. Leaning across her desk, she thumbed it active. "Master Discern." The voice of one of the healers with the med unit on Mist filtered through. "Master, we have 4 critical cases here that need immediate evac." "I'm on my way," Callista replied. Summoning her Padawan, she spoke calmly but quickly. "I'm heading dirtside to pick up the wounded. Please have a trauma team meet me in the landing bay." "Yes, Master." Nodding, Callista turned and ran down the corridor, technicians and other Jedi moving aside as they sensed the urgency. Thumbing her wrist comm, she hailed the Firebird. "Ari, please meet me in the landing bay. We have 4 critical cases to evac. I'll be bringing a trauma team with me." "Acknowledged," Ari responded. She then heard Ari issuing orders before she signed off. Skidding around the corner, Callista almost ran into the trauma team as they reached the bay simultaneously. The door slid apart to reveal the Firebird setting down just as they entered. Ari ran down the ramp to help the team with their equipment. Who we got? Yes. You can thank Frosty Tools for that shout out. It's lovely. Yes. Callista followed Ari and took the jump seat in the cockpit. We have 4 critical cases to evac, plus some with less serious wounds. Ari nodded and watched Brink as the Firebird soared out of the bay towards the planet below. Set her down over there, Brink, Ari instructed her friend and pilot, pointing at a clearing next to the 2 roughly constructed shelters that the Jedi were using as a temporary medical center. Brink had the Firebird on the surface in no time, and its smooth and steady landing was proof of its years of experience piloting. Hundreds must never make it to the med tents, Callista whispered once they were on the ground and the boarding ramp lowered, revealing 7 Jedi lying on makeshift gurneys with 3 other Jedi tending to their wounds. Ari nodded in agreement, knowing these were the few lucky ones not killed in combat. Take these 3 to the ship and come back. I'm going to assess these 4 before we move them, Ari said, moving towards the more severely wounded of the bunch. Callista nodded in reply and helped the 3 wounded Jedi hobble to the Firebird. Ari looked each of them over. 1 woman and 3 men. The woman was suffering from 2 broken ribs, a deep gash up to the forehead, and a minor slash in her left arm. The men were worse, though. One's arm had been severed above the elbow and he lay unconscious. The other 2 had wounds to their chest and abdomen and were barely conscious. Ari removed her tiki blade from her left boot and ran it through one of the torches burning at the corners of the tent to mark it as a non-combat zone, until the blade was hot. She moved to the man whose arm had been severed. Although lightsabers generally cauterized most wounds, this man's arm must have only been partially cut due to the severed edges that were bleeding profusely. Force, I hate to do this, Ari thought to herself. She had tended to wounded under field combat conditions many times, but she always hated to see a fallen soldier. Thank you for that follow. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for that follow. Okay. But she always hated to see a fallen soldier. She laid her hand on the man's forehead and put him into a healing trance so he would not feel any pain. Callista returned and stood at Ari's side, silently observing. Put the woman in a healing trance. Her broken ribs will keep. Then tend to the other 2. They have internal bleeding, Ari instructed her. Callista nodded again and silently went about tending to the other wounded, the 3 non-combatant Jedi aiding her as best as they could. Ari took a deep breath and steadied her hand. Then she began to cut, opening the wound so she could remove bits of seared tunic and dirt. After cleansing the wound, she sutured it and wrapped it in bandages. Oops, give me 1 second. She instructed one of the other Jedi to administer a shot of high-potency antibiotics and antivirals before she moved to clean the blood from her tiki blade. This one can be moved now, Ari told her. Ari then moved to the end of the makeshift tents. It was getting dark, and she could hear the battle raging somewhere over the hill that backed the medical tents. At least Micron had enough sense to flank the med tents with this hill to provide protection, Ari smiled to herself. Ari, the wounded are loaded and secure. Commander Cadre asked when we will be departing, Callista reported to Ari, standing beside her as they looked up the hill. Good. Tell Brink to take you back to New Hope and continue healing their wounds. Come back for me in an hour. Wait, surely you weren't thinking about staying? It's too dangerous. I've been in far more dangerous situations before and come out just fine. Now, do as I say. Return for me in an hour. Callista looked like she wanted to argue, but decided against it and headed back for the Firebird. Father said the 2 forms of light could not be separated. Micron needs me, Ari whispered to herself, a deep, transient feeling washing over her as she began to climb the hill towards the battle beyond. She what? Brink almost yelled as Callista reported Ari's orders. It was her wish, Commander. For the love of Criffing Hut, Sithspawn, Ari, you crazed damn Jedi-loving fool! Brink cursed loudly, ignoring Callista's presence aboard the ship as he raised the boarding ramp and fired the repulsor lifts before he began to pilot back to New Hope with the wounded aboard. He continued to curse and rant the whole way. Callista heard him raving something about pregnant Koshakian women, and she just smiled. The Phoenix has finally arrived. She will move to her husband's side in battle. We must not allow them to be reunited, Micron with two Y's, instructed for his 4 adepts. They bowed and left his side. His dark gaze rested on one figure amongst the sea of Jedi and Sith. He saw his enemy's grandson fighting off 2 of his adepts quite skillfully. Micron Din, our time has come. I will make you come to me through your grandson. Micron Din smiled to himself, igniting his blade, and slowly made his way through the battlefield for Turlan Din. And that is the end of chapter 14. Yes. Yeah. So that's the end of chapter 14. And this is actually the end of my last stream before I head off to Wyoming. So I won't see you guys on stream again until August 14th. So it's gonna be a bit of a wait till the next one. So I'll be around, but I just won't be streaming until I get back from Wyoming. So, but thank you everybody that was here this evening. I appreciate you, and I apologize profusely for my internet / OBS. I don't know what was going on. I think it was the weather, but we managed to get through the chapters. So thank you for everybody that stuck around, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I will be around on Discord. And if you'd like to keep up with what I'm up to while I'm in Wyoming, I will probably be posting a bunch in there. I don't tend to post on Twitter or Instagram all that much. So, if anybody wants to, there's my Discord. Alright. But let's see, is there anybody still? Let's see. See if there's anybody. Oh. Let's see. Trying to decide if I have enough energy to go raid this evening. Let's see. Let's see. Trying to see if there's anybody else on my list. Oh gosh, sorry. Let's see. You know what? Let's go say hi to Arcfox. He is another member of the Survivor Squad community. He does a lot of crafting. Actually, he's playing Warhammer right now. So let's go say hi. So okay. That raid command, the first one is for subscribers. Second one is for everybody else. Let me see if it'll let me copy it. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. There we go. So we're gonna go say hi to ArcFox. Give me just a second while I get this sorted. And of course we have an ad. Of course. Every time. Every time. Oh, he's Warhammer model painting. Excuse me. All right. Yeah. So he's painting Warhammer models. I'm actually gonna wait until the ad is up. It's 40 seconds. I'm gonna wait to do that until. Yeah. Just gonna wait for the ad to come up. Thank you, Frosty Jules. Alright. Alrighty. Alright. We are back from that ad. Thank you so much for keeping me company through that. I appreciate you. They do help support the channel. So as I was saying before the ad so rudely interrupted me, we're going to go raid ArcFox, who is another member of the Survivor Squad community. He is a maker and crafter. Currently he is painting Warhammer models, which is pretty awesome, if I do say so myself. So we're gonna go and say hi. So please come along with me on that raid. I would very much appreciate it. And then we can go about our evening and do our post-stream things. So give me just 1 second and I will get this raid going. Okay. Here we go. And I will see you guys when I get back from Wyoming. Have a great night.